Recently, I was informally moderating an informal debate between a couple of very political friends of mine, one of whom, neither of them want to be partisan, but basically one of them is conservative and the other one is a libertarian, socialist, anarchist-y type. They were talking about the healthcare cuts that happened in the 90s here in Alberta under Ralph Klein, which you can more or less expect to always come up whenever there's a debate about politics and the economy in Alberta, the Klein cuts, because on the one hand, Ralph Klein did pay off Alberta's debt, so we're fairly well off. But on the other hand, he so severely and mercilessly cut healthcare that a lot of nurses were out of a job, and a lot of them still sneer when they hear his name, and so on and so forth. Well, my anarchist friend was bringing up these individual people he knew who had lost their jobs because of the Klein cuts, and my conservative friend sneered at him that he was being a bleeding heart because he was caught up in these individual sob stories and not appreciating that those cuts were necessary for the overall economic health of Alberta, and basically tough crap, shit happens, and it needs to happen in order for the economy to progress, basically. Jobs are always lost. Such is the way of the world. That's an interesting phrase, bleeding heart. As far as I know, I think dictionary.com will back me up on this. The first person to use it in the way we use it today, like the bleeding heart liberal, was a fellow named Westbrook Pegler. I don't know if you guys have heard of Westbrook Pegler, but I've been sort of interested in him for a little while now. I'm going to post a link to William F. Buckley's eulogy of him, or obituary of him, I suppose I should say, which you can tell is sort of ambivalent. I mean, you can tell he kind of has respect for the guy, and a certain amount of respect is due to him. But he was a smart guy, but he was also crazy, and he was also unpleasant as an individual, and his views got crazier. I mean, he was more or less a fascist. I mean, he was a bircher and so on and so forth. And also, Sarah Palin recently quoted him in the last few years, if I recall, just as an incidental aside. So, and there's still, I mean, if you care to look under the right rocks, there's still a lot of resentment towards Westbrook Pegler. So anyways, all I have to say, I bring that up just to mention that the guy who originated this phrase, bleeding heart liberal, was a hard-hearted asshole. Just, to give the perspective on that. As far as I can tell, I mean, there's a few conjectures as to why he chose that phrase, bleeding heart. But, I mean, in one sense, the heart literally pumps blood, so it's redundant. But I think when most people think of a bleeding heart, they think of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Probably the most recognizable piece of Catholic iconography. Of course, it's the heart of Jesus, enhaloed by the crown of thorns, which is piercing it, and blood is dripping from it, like tears. I mean, it looks like the heart is crying tears, basically. And you see a similar thing with the Immaculate Heart of Mary, which is pierced through with a spear, in accordance with the prophecy in the Gospel of Luke. Also bleeding, and then you see the hearts intertwined and things like this. And it's interesting to me that not only is it the most probably easily recognizable piece of Catholic iconography, it's also one of the pieces of Christian imagery, period, that so appeals to the secular world. Since Ronnie James Dio just recently died here, he had a whole album called Sacred Heart, and there's a song on there. I'll post a link to a video of it. Interesting lyrics. I mean, I'm not sure exactly if he means, I suspect he doesn't mean exactly what Christians mean, but we're all looking for the Sacred Heart. Follow the light and we'll find the Sacred Heart. And of course, he had a Catholic background and spoke a lot about religion in his song lyrics. But it's also probably, I mean, I don't want to exaggerate, but it's a really, really popular image you see on tattoos. And I find that really fascinating, that even the secular world is so taken with this image. Maybe it's just because it's a really striking image. But I suspect there may be a little more than that, or maybe something that resonates more with people than that. And the question you kind of have to raise is, why is the Sacred Heart an image? I mean, why is there a devotion to the Sacred Heart that's been cultivated through the Catholic history? Well, there's a whole lot of things, and I'll have to kind of compile some links for the description box, but Jesus, it's often said, did not really die so much of being crucified. He died of a broken heart, and the evidence that's adduced for that is the fact that when his side was pierced, out came water and blood, which is said to be symptomatic of someone whose heart is like collapsed. Whatever the physiology of that is, whether that's sound or not, it's certainly a popular notion that he died. He laid down his life. It wasn't taken from him. He chose the moment of his death, and his heart kind of collapsed under the weight of his kind of sorrow over sin, and at feeling abandoned by God, and so on and so forth. And then the question is, when he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? There's an answer to that question. He's not just sort of spouting his semi-blasphemous pleas to God. He's asking us, why did God forsake him to be killed? And the answer is for our sin. And that's what his heart is bleeding for. That's why you see Christ weeping so often. Well, he's called the man of sorrows in the prophecy in Isaiah 53. He weeps over our sin. He weeps that his people, both Jerusalem and the New Jerusalem, so frequently abandon him and have abandoned him. And the fact that his heart is bleeding shows that even though we've turned our backs on him, he's turned his back and taken our sins upon him. And I don't want to get into the theology of that or whatever, but then furthermore, when his heart is pierced, and at the same time a sword pierces the heart of Mary, the connection between the two, which one would expect almost of any mother and son, and water and blood come out. First of all, John interprets that. The Gospel of John, you really need to read the epistles as well to kind of get the perspective on what he's talking about a lot of the time, but those are witnesses to the fact of his physical death. He really did lay out in his life in love for us, but it's furthermore, there's a sacramental imagery there. In the same way that Adam fell asleep and out of his side God fashioned his wife. When Jesus falls asleep, when he dies, when he gives up his life, God fashions the church, his bride, out of his side. And the water is taken to symbolize baptism, and the blood is taken to symbolize the wine of the Eucharistic feast, which is turned into his blood in transubstantiation. All of which to say, the sacred bleeding heart represents the blood coming out of the heart. Everything about that image is about Christ's love towards his people and towards the world. The sacrificial love, which he then calls on all of us to imitate. We're supposed to also have the Spirit flowing out of our belly like rivers. We're also supposed to manifest that sacrificial love towards the world. We're supposed to be Christ's to the world. Mother Teresa spoke extensively on this sort of thing. And I only mention her because people will probably know about her, and all the saints have spoken about on this to some extent or another. There's a reason. Stigmata is not just a cool thing that happens to people to kind of point them back to Christ in a general sort of way. Oh yeah, he was also pierced. There's more to it than that. There's a reason why so much significance has been attached to the number of the wounds of Christ and what they all symbolize and what their connotations are. Nothing is without significance and symbolism. Anyways, all that said, my question is, why is bleeding heart an insult? Something that recalls the love of Christ. Why is it considered a bad thing to have a heart that weeps for individuals? I'm not saying that you shouldn't also have a strong mind. Jesus says, be as wise as serpents, and even says elsewhere, the children of darkness are in their generation wiser than the children of light. So we're supposed to be shrewd, definitely, but as innocent as doves. We should have that same sensitivity, not a fragility, but certainly a vulnerability, I think. A willingness to weep with those who weep. And I don't think that I want to be a bleeding heart. I find my heart is way too hard. I need it to be broken, and I need it to bleed, and I need it to weep. I don't know about you. Anyways, that's all I have to say for now. I find it funny, I find it amusing, I find it ironic that we consider bleeding heart an insult. Since when did it become an insult to have love like Christ's? And that's all I have to say for this video, I suppose. Take care.